Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another reading from J.B. Priestley. I nearly said J.R. Hartley then. I just saw the lovely Julia had popped online. Nice to see you. Bit cold in the studio this morning. We'll get cracking in a second, just making sure everything's working and that you can hear me, see me, and all those things. Today we are reading from English Journey, chapter 9, to the Tyne. We are getting through the book slowly but surely. Very impressed that we have managed to get thus far, really. So that's very good, very pleased. Hello, Audrey. Nice to see you out there. Hope you're well. We have had a bit of sunshine and I have been out on my bicycle. I have risked life and limb. I've risked my back going out on the bike again, so that seems to have gone down okay. Right, well, we'll get cracking straight into the reading. This is J.B. Priestley's journey. He has left, where was he before? He was in Blackpool, wasn't he? And then he went into Manchester and that area, Blackburn, I think he was in, wasn't he, last? And he's left. Crossed the Pennines, he said, and made his way to the Tyne. Good morning, Martin Lewis. Buenos dias. Why, aye, man. Yes, there's a bit of why, aye, manning in here. And it's the one, it's not the one, it's one of many accents which I am not going to try because I am not very good at it. The morning was a fury of rain. Cutting through the Pennines and across the West Riding, we made for the Great North Road, and finally reached it by the way of Ripon. I have most unhappy memories of Ripon, and I am not the only one, by several thousand, for it was here, in the late autumn of 1916, that I found myself in what was called by some ironic jester at the War Office, a convalescent camp. Actually, it was not a camp fit for troops bursting with health, and for genuine convalescence it was a nightmare of mud, bad food, and petty tyrannies. I do not know what beribboned ass was responsible for the miseries of that camp, and I think that my spirits sang as low as they have ever did anywhere there during the war. But even after all these years, I am not ready to forgive him or his ghost. As we crawled through the marketplace and the water streamed down the car windows, grotesquely distorting Ripon's most fashionable shops, I said to myself, well, it's pouring with rain and you're a long way from home and you're going still further away from it and you've got a cold coming on and a worrying, nagging, quite impossible sort of book on your hands, just when you decided you needed a rest from books. But, by heck, you're a prince, my lad, compared with what you were 17 years ago when you were herded into the camp here like diseased sheep. And that will do for Ripon. Something more must be said, however, about the cold which was coming on, for it plays a part in the narrative that follows. I suffer at times from damp, snivelling colds in the head, which descend upon me quite suddenly, turning me into a helpless and disgusting red-nosed, red-eyed animal, feebly crying for still more handkerchiefs. Now, my doctor had found some stuff for me that immediately dried up these colds. It didn't cure them, but it drove them, so to speak, from the surface, and after a dose or two of it, I am no longer helpless and sodden, but I am able to carry out, perhaps rather drearily, an average programme of work or play. In the car, travelling north, I realised that a particularly nasty cold was threatening, and unless I grappled with it at once, I should be unable to see anything for days, and my journey would be wasted. So I began dosing myself with this mixture. It contains belladonna. You take it before food, and for a few seconds, as a result of its drying up properties, it does make you feel rather sick. As the cold seemed to be a gigantic size and of gigantic size and strength, I had to keep on dosing myself up all week. I was able to do all I had to arrange to do. Nobody, in fact, knew I had a cold, but inside me was an arena of the grand 7-day contest, giant cold versus belladonna mixture. This meant that throughout these days I was not quite my usual self. I had been told since a competent medical authority that I probably had a temperature all the time. The result was that I moved in a world that was not quite the ordinary real world. It wobbled and bulged at times, like the world that we know in dreams. A more marked subjective element, I suspect, was the presence of a field of was. A more marked subjective element, I suspect, was present in my field of observation. Hence, this paragraph, which is not an attempt to force upon you a more than usually disgusting bit of autobiography, but a possible explanation of why things looked very queer indeed, and were a little larger and wilder than life during the next few days. I ask the reader to remember the swarming bacteria, the drenchings of belladonna, and the rising temperature. We reached the Great North Road. Along its deserted length, the raindrops were bouncing merrily. There was no more colour in the day itself than there is in a bundle of steel rods. But up to Darlington, the red ruins of autumn were still about us. At the Great Divide of the North Road, Scotch Corner, which ought to be the most romantic spot in the country, but somehow is not, we turned right for Darlington, and while the rain still spouted into the main street there, I sat upstairs in a cafe and ate roast muffin and treacle pudding behind the Yorkshire Post folded against a water jug. The waitress who attended to me was tall, frail, and looked tubercular. Tubercular? I guess that's what it is. Probably my own temperature was still beginning to rise then. Still, it's surprising how many waitresses in these cafes are tall, frail, and look tubercular. We ran through County Durham, which offered us nothing but glimpses of coal pits and mining villages. There was a nightmare place that seemed to have been constructed out of a small army. Huts and unwanted dog kennels, all sprawling in the muck outside some gigantic works. What they made inside those works I did not discover, but even Kaffir would not have envied those employees. Kaffir? Would not have envied those employees if it was they who lived in those forlorn shanties. A dingy huddle of cottage houses, Bethels in corrugated iron, picture palaces with hardly a flake of paint left on them, butchers' windows decorated with offal, all announced that we were arriving at some great industrial centre, that soon we would be in civilization again. First, a mile or two of Gateshead, to which we will return later, then a great bridge across steaming space, and we were in Newcastle. I'd been in these parts only once before, and that was during the war, not long after I'd left Ripon. Then I lived for some weeks in a pier pavilion, or something of the kind, at Tynemouth, doing odd and unpleasant jobs. One of the oddest, I remember, was going out in the boat on the Tyne in charge of a party of 4 men, all of us monstrously encumbered with rifles, bayonets and equipment, to a ship that had just arrived from Scandinavia. It was a gusty, wet winter's day, I remember, and we had to climb from this bobbing boat up a slippery rope ladder, each of us so heavily loaded that we weighed a ton and could hardly move, to the main deck of this ship, which was being searched for spies. We didn't find any spies, but we had a few cups of coffee from the cook. During this brief stay at Tynemouth, I roamed a good deal when off duty, and so made the acquaintance of most of the Tyneside towns: North Shields, South Shields, Jarrow, Gateshead, and the metropolis Newcastle, which promised us, after a dash by electric train, a good tea and a show at the Hippodrome or the Empire. I have a very distinct recollection of taking a great dislike to the whole district, which seemed to me so ugly that it made the West Riding towns look like inland resorts. The people were not bad once you got to know them, though even to a Yorkshire lad they appeared uncouth. And I disliked, as I still do, the accent. As a rule, I like local accents and have kept one myself. Like, they make for the variety in speech and give men's talk a flavour of the particular countryside to which at heart they belong. Standard English is like standard anything, poor, tasteless stuff. Probably if I had spent most of my impressionable years near the Tyne and had known the ecstasies of first love in Newcastle's Desmond Dean, I might have discovered treasures of cadence in their local accent. But as it is, I can find nothing pleasant to say about it. To my ears, it sounds almost barbarous, monotonous, and irritating twang. Every phrase rises in exactly the same way, almost to a scream. Ta-ta, tor, ta-ta, ti-ti. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that. The constant aye, mon, or aye, ya bastard, of the men talk, and the never-ending hinnying of the women seem to me equally objectionable. It is probably difficult for a visitor to make all the necessary allowances for the effect of the local accent upon his opinion of a place, if that accent produces a slight but perpetual irritation. One ought to allow a liberal discount for its bad influence. The centre of Newcastle, into which we had now landed, has a certain sombre dignity. The streets are fairly wide, the shops are good, and there are more impressive buildings than one would expect. It is chiefly built of stone that has turned almost dead black. Newcastle is even blacker than Manchester, and might almost have been carved out of coal. The sad trade depression into which most of the district has fallen is not immediately noticeable here in the capital. The city looked busy and quite prosperous. After casting about a bit, I found a hotel that looked as if it might be reasonably quiet at night and early in the morning. It was, but only because I took a gloomy little back bedroom. I unpacked my bag, sniffed a bit, took another dose of the mixture, and said to myself, well, here I am in Newcastle. I had then to consider my next move. The afternoon was nearly done. It was still raining, though not hard, and the whole city seemed a black, steaming mass. I had not a friend in the place, and at that moment I wasn't even sure if I had a friend in the world. I sent out for the local paper, and then wasted an hour staring gloomily at it rather than reading it, and smoking a pipe that appeared to be rapidly losing its flavour. I ought, I know, to have been busy and elated, for this was the most northerly point of my journey, and soon, very soon, I would be turning round again and making for home. But I sat there in my little bedroom, like a man marooned in Lapland. I said bitter things about the two publishers who, far away in London, after having lunched well, were now brisk and cheerful in their respective private offices, probably arranging for some other poor fool of an author to leave home for months. And I was enormously sorry for myself. Then, remembering that I had a job to do, I climbed out of this morass of silliness and set about exploring Tyneside. I did explore the Tyneside and have not been genuinely sorry for myself since, though at times I have caught myself at the old drooping tricks and have been ashamed. You see, there is something bracing about the Tyne. After you've seen it, you realise that it is not for the likes of us to be sorry for ourselves. How are we doing? Good morning to Lisa. Good morning to John Blake. Good morning to Mark Donny McLeod. Not wrong with a Geordie. Paul, Jay, evening Richard. End of a beautiful warm autumnal day in Melbourne. Not very kind of you to join me from all different parts of the world. How lovely is that? Where's my mouse gone? Good day, Richard. Good day there, John. Beautiful Queen's Day. Sunny 27. Not bad in autumn. Fantastic. Christopher Russell. Hope everyone is keeping well. Hope so. Fiona Hammond. Good morning. Good morning. Marvellous. We are on Tyneside, it seems. Let's see how much he likes of this place. He seems to have not liked any of the places he's been to, really. I made a start by remembering that I had some humorous, aggressively correspondence with a bookseller in the city. I would look him up. It proved to be an excellent move. I found him in and not too busy. He gave me a cup of tea and we settled down before the fire in his office for a good talk. He is in the rare book and first edition branch of the trade, which has suffered a great deal from the Depression in America. Nearly all booksellers of this type have been mostly unlucky with bad debts that they've had in America, where bibliophiles seem to be rather casual in money matters. I care very little about rare books and first editions. I write books, I read plenty of them, but I am no bookman or book lover, no collector. I have never understood the first edition man at all. He seems to be the most foolish of collectors. And when I find the prices of the early editions being raised £1 or £2 because of a dropped letter on the title page or a misprint in the first chapter, I feel I am spying upon lunatics. In spite of these opinions, which I openly acknowledged, I got on very well with my Newcastle bookseller, though he was no mere tradesman, but, like most of his kind, himself an enthusiast, whose mouth watered at the thought of a dropped letter. He was a man of my own age, and no dreamy bookman, but one who lived vividly in the present. This was fortunate for me. When he asked me what I was doing in Newcastle, I replied that I didn't know, but that I should like to look around at the district. This pleased him, and he said that he would like to show me what there was to be seen. Meanwhile, that evening he had 1 or 2 calls to make. He did some work on the People's Theatre, but otherwise was at my service. Let him do whatever he had to do, I suggested, and I would go with him if I was not in the way, and so in this easy fashion I might contrive to see something of Newcastle life on a black, wet November night. It worked very well. First we had some food, not bad, in a very hot grill room that he recommended. After that we ran and dodged and ran through the pouring rain to a tram which took us to the bottom of a narrow hilly road. At the top were some bedraggled women trying to sell peanuts, a small building, some men and lads hanging about as if they were in June, and a pay box. This was St. James's Hall, where boxing shows are held nightly. I asked for 2 ringside seats. The man said, 7d each. For the next half-minute we were at cross purposes. I wanted better seats than the 7d ones, and he thought I was trying to get to the ringside for less than 7d. It appeared that on ordinary nights there were only 2 classes of seats, the 3d balconies and the 7d ringside. I think the 7d was a fair price for what we saw. The square hall, with its rows of seats climbing steeply all around the ring, looked almost empty when we first went inside, but I soon discovered that it was deceptively large in its seating capacity, and that actually there were already several hundred people there, mostly in the threepenny balconies. The bouts we saw were either between rather stringy lads who arrived in the ring wearing overcoats, or between ugly lumpy pitmen with their blue coal marks on their hairy bodies. Those ignorant persons who imagine that boxing contests reek of blood would here have been confirmed for once in their opinion. There was a lot of blood about, partly because most of the boxers were novices who hit out wildly and bled easily. The flat-faced seconds seemed to be forever sponging away the crimson stains. The crowd didn't seem to mind this. They were a bloodthirsty lot. "Go on, you bastard!" "Aye, aye, man, go on, you bastard!" They seemed to be muttering all the time. This was not an evening when they were willing to concentrate on the finer points of the craft, which were indeed obviously absent. They wanted the rough stuff. "Go on, you bastard!" they kept crying in delight when one of the stained gloves got home with a nasty thud. Some boxing matches are enchanting spectacles. The powerful lights over the ring cutting through the haze of smoke, the torso of the pugilists, the quick ripple of muscle, the satiny bloom of their skins, the race and speed and strength of those two figures in the brilliant little arena, the dim mounds of faces that can suddenly let out such a huge roar. This was not one of those boxing matches. It was uncompromisingly ugly. The naked arc lights, the empty rows of seats, the awkward blood-stained fighters, the jeering spectators, all helped to make the scene an unpleasant one. I looked about me and thought I have never seen a crowd of men whose looks pleased me less. There was not one intelligent, sensitive face in sight, or so it seemed in that harsh setting. For a moment I had a vision of a dark sub-humanity, like those underground creatures in Wells's Time Machine. "Had enough?" my companion asked. I had. "So have I," he said. "This stuff's no good. You ought to be here on one of the big nights when Seaman Watson's fighting. He's a local lad, you know." "Aye, he's a local lad." "Let's go. I have to leave that message at the rehearsal." We went out. It was still raining. The lads, who could not afford the threepenny for admission, were still hanging about the entrance outside. The women were still trying to sell their peanuts. We rode in the trams again, among the smell of wet clothes. In the shadows of an enormous ebony bridge, which looked as if it stretched into outer space into the outer space of the universe, we found a large and almost deserted pub. But vague noises came from upstairs, and I was steered into their direction. This was the rehearsal. It was being directed by a middle-aged man in a blue suit who peered at his players through the smoke of his cigarette. When we crept in, a spectacled young man in a raincoat was declaiming with passion the lines about Greek gods and Trojan heroes. "Now then," said the producer, when the spectacled youth had retired, gasping, "now then, chorus." Then, to my surprise, about a dozen women, mostly rather short women in coloured mackintoshes, who'd been standing about in a slightly shamefaced fashion, like the mothers of children at dancing classes, suddenly grouped themselves, slowly moving forwards, as if sowing imaginary seeds or stewing invisible flowers, and in a faraway voice began chanting verses that prophesied woe. A very tall girl, as if maddened by the sight of so many mackintoshes, rushed out of a corner, flung up an arm, made her eyes flash away as if she were a human lighthouse, and angrily addressed the chorus, giving them 3 woes to their 1. This roused another young man in a raincoat who appeared to be appeared to be in a towering rage and apparently didn't care if he gave himself a sore throat. But the raincoats were not to have it all their own way. The Macintoshes grouped themselves again and returned to their chanting, conducted enthusiastically by the producer, who encouraged me to hope that he was about to throw away his cigarette and dance for us. Perhaps he might have done, but just then a rather shy and pretty tweed winter coat swam forward and told us softly that she was Argreave Helen, and then delivered quite a long speech about herself with coloured macintoshes rustling all around. Those who know the Trojan Women may search in vain for a scene in it resembling this, and possibly my memory may have failed me, but it was certainly the Trojan Women they were rehearsing. If you'd been standing in the saloon bar downstairs and had heard them moving about on the floor above, how many guesses would you have to make before you reached the right conclusion? You would have said that they were playing snooker or dancing or having a whist drive, and might have gone on guessing for days before you had suggested that they might be rehearsing Trojan Women. If you're writing a story about a large pub in Newcastle, you would never have the impudence to fill the first floor front row with people rehearsing a Greek drama. But there is no end to the impudent surprises and odd twists of reality. My companion had now quietly delivered his message, and at the conclusion of Helen's speech, before the Macintoshes could get going again, we sneaked out, and down the stairs I muttered, What's Habuka to them, or are they Habuka? Hekuba? I don't know. Hekuba? Don't give me complicated foreign words to pronounce. I am rubbish at it. Cuba. Hekuba? What's Hekuba to them? Hekuba. Hecuba. What is that? Another tram, and then another long walk in the rain. It never stopped raining all night. Brought us to a basement where some people with painted faces and false whiskers were drinking coffee and eating buns. We were now, I was told, underneath the stage of the People's Theatre. This did not surprise me. I could not be surprised any more. But the theatre deserves a word. Its prices range from sixpence to half a crown, and if you buy a serial ticket for 5 shillings, you're admitted throughout the season at half price. The productions that season included Peer Gynt, Widowers' Houses, The Insect Play, Loyalties, and The Trojan Women. A good fare, solid tack, value for money. The players are all amateurs. I met one of the theatre's most enthusiastic helpers, whom I will call Bob. We didn't stay long, and Bob left with us. Once more, we walked through the rain. We went to the central station, missed the train we wanted, went to a bus stop and found that we had missed the bus we wanted, walked through more rain, climbed onto a bus, got out and did more walking. We were now outside the city, high up somewhere, and in the comfortable little home of my friend, the bookseller. At least, that's where I think we were, for by this time the evening was becoming so very unreal, a mad mixture of rain, grill rooms, trams, rain, peanuts, boxers, trams, rain, Trojan women in coloured macintoshes, buns in basements, theatricals, rain, buses, remote suburbs, and a never-ending stream of talk about books, plays, railway, shipbuilding, coal, the means test, Russia, Germany, politics, sport, life, and death. But I remember walking with Bob to catch the last electric train back to Newcastle. We waited about a quarter of an hour in one of the wettest and most melancholy little stations I've ever seen. We might have been waiting for the ghost train. The metal rails were straight from one of the the metal rails were straight from one of the mysterious. The metal rails went straight from one mysterious darkness to another. We were alone on that tiny platform. We sat in a dim shed of a waiting room with the rain dully drumming on a wooden roof. You could not have had a better opening scene for a sinister film. It was a grand little station for a murder. But though Bob and I did not always agree, we were far removed from thoughts of murder. Bob was busy talking, and I equally was busy listening. That murder was not even mentioned will surprise some people when they learn that Bob was a militant communist. Bob deserved some space to himself, not simply because I spent part of the evening and nearly all of the next evening in his company, but because he seems to me a figure of some significance. Though he is very much an individual, he is also a distinct type too. There are a good many Bobs about, especially in the north, and before long there'll probably be a great many more. Wipe out at once any mental sketch of a sullen, greasy, long-haired, blue-chinned comrade. Bob is a strongly built, alert working man in his 30s, with a good forceful face, eyes slightly aslant and wide apart, blunt nose, short moustache, square chin, and a clean, neat appearance. He's married and has a fine little boy of whom he is immensely proud. I do not think it would be fair to him to say what his occupation is, but he is employed by a very large concern, works hard and for long hours, and his wages are just over £2 a week. He has to be up before 6 in the morning, and as he lives some distance from his work, he's not back again until the early evening. He spends nearly all his leisure either helping at the settlement for the unemployed or lending a hand with such activities as the People's Theatre. He admitted that this was hard on his wife, she saw so little of him, but told me that she understood and sympathised with him and made the best of it. In his amateur theatricals he is a promising comedian. When a bit of a holiday comes his way, he likes to do a little careful watercolouring sketching, and what he does is very credible to the untrained man with not much time to spare. He's very kindly, lively but forceful sort of chap who, if he were living in a pioneer society where labour was in demand and ability soon rewarded, he would quickly win promotion for a foreman, a manager, and so forth. He is something of a natural leader. Having grown up in a very different kind of life, he has turned communist. He's not at all sentimental about his own class, except that its theoretical existence as the proletariat, but quite sternly realistic in his attitude towards it, as we shall see later. He is not equally realistic, however, about the other classes with whom he hardly comes into contact. The world he lives in is not the sad muddle that most of us have begun to recognise, but it is a mysterious and melodramatic place of vast, sinister conspiracies in which capitalists and bosses and officials plot together to trick him and his mates. Thus, he grumbled and sneered because the concern that employs him has lately been spending money on a certain extension of its premises. They could not spare money, he complained, to give the work people some decent wages, but they could throw it away just to please a few officials on these building operations. Now, even I, who knew very little about the concern, didn't know this, that it was spending money in a desperate attempt to get more business, and the process of finding the money for this extension must have been like wringing blood out of a stone. But this is typical of his attitude of mind. He didn't make this an excuse to attack the muddled, wasteful, competitive system, which would have been legitimate enough. He saw it as one more example of the conspiracy of bosses and officials. He thinks that most people are poor because few are rich. Any man receiving more than a few pounds a week automatically becomes one of the sinister, conspiring class. The modern world, to him, is simply a wicked place, and not, as it seems to many of us, a stupid place. When he talks of his neighbours or the men he works with, he's a realist, quick to notice many of their weaknesses, but he argues unconsciously, But when he argues, unconsciously, he becomes an idealist and talks about the workers as if they were a race of bright, beautiful beings incapable of selfishness, indolence, and corruption. On the other hand, men of the employing or managing class are never, to him, men, very much like himself, who, though they may be servants of a faculty and even a cruel system, are honestly trying to do their duty and be decent and kind and unselfish. They're always sneering, cunning tyrants, to whom the very poverty and helplessness of people are a source of deep satisfaction. And he is, I suspect, permanently trapped into this attitude, like thousands of other working men who have managed to raise themselves above the beer and betting middle mindlessness of their mates. I'm not, of course, presenting my friend Bob as an example of a Marxian thinker. He's not really a thinker at all, except when he is shrewdly realistic about the life in his immediate neighbourhood. He made one great effort, an effort that not all of us would have been capable of making in his circumstances, to jump clear of this beer and betting jungle, this brutish, fatalistic acceptance of the miserable muddle of our present society, and to arrive at the level of his own brand of communistic thought. And since then, I suspect he has done no independent thinking at all, but has simply applied a woefully rough and ready standard to everything. His communism is not a reasoned alternative to the social machine that is wobbling and running down, is not a transition from the obviously incompetent and unjust system and order of society that embodies our ideas of competence and justice. It is the entrance into a human paradise, into a new golden age, from which, by some mysterious means, all the selfish wickedness of the present world will be banished. Nobody could be more cynical than he is about the elected persons and men in authority here and now, but he has no difficulty in persuading himself that in a communist England all elected persons and men in authority would acquire a new mystical virtue. This is Bob, and I have met scores like him. There must be indeed thousands like him in the making, and no picture of contemporary industrial England would be complete without a portrait of him. Nevertheless, in spite of much disagreement, I thought Bob himself a grand chap, and when he told me on that deserted last train to Newcastle that he would be spending the next night conducting a rehearsal of some unemployed men for a forthcoming Pierrot show at the Unemployed Men's Settlement, I was only too glad to accept his invitation to call him at his home. Then we parted outside the dark station and the dripping entrance to Newcastle Central Station, where the newspaper boys, despairing to sell another paper, were begging for coppers. These lads looked like the most miserable sodden bundles of old clothes. Bob told me, however, that they are great hands at betting. We are a nation of sportsmen. And there, after that description of Bob, we will leave Mr. Priestley and his English journey. How about that? That was quite interesting. Let's quickly have a look. I don't know how you pronounce it. How do you pronounce that? Hecuba. Is it Hecuba? Hecuba was a queen in Greek mythology. Right. The wife of King Priam of Troy. During the Trojan War, she had 19 children. Oh my God, that must have been difficult. Who included major characters in Homer's Iliad, such as the warriors Hector and Paris and the prophetess Cassandra. Hecuba. Is that how it's Hecuba? Smartass. Yes, it's called quick Googling. Hi, Richard and Julia. Late as ever. No worries, Linda. It's all that red wine you drink. Poor Cassandra, lass, has been rough, as Medusa, who used to read a lot of comics, and one was the Greek legends of Homer's strip doll. Okay, that went over my head. Mark Dolly McLeod, Tippakai, that's a joke in Brumia. If you want a kipper tie, milk and... Oh yeah, do you want a kipper tie? Do you want to kip a tie? Oh, yeah. For some reason, profile photo has disappeared. Was there last night. Yeah, I don't know what happened last night. We on the Vogue show, it was overwrought with scammers and what have you. Shirley Ward, good morning. Good morning to you, Shirley. Nice of you to join us. Flower was the round-headed rampion, the pride of Sussex. Morton, Led Zeppelin country. Linda Kane. Oh, there, Linda Kane. Hello, Shirley Ward. I think you've got a flower back. I don't know how you managed that, but it's now back. Wow, you lot are up and just up and about, says Seeley Chase. I have no idea, Lisa, how you put here Heckabecky or something. How do you pronounce that? That's the most complicated way. Can you not do it phonetically or sounds like this rather than that? This says Heckabee or something. Delighted Dolores was the stripper at the local pub in the 80s. Better than Heckabee or Hecuba or whatever it is. Yes, I'm sure. Anyway, that was quite fun. He seems to have drawn out of the misery that he was when he was in Blackpool and Manchester. So there we go. Anyway, that's all I'm going to do today. I'm going to take it slightly easier today. I hope that's all right. I've been out for a cycle ride. Oh, here we go. Show hide. They don't work for me when it comes up show hide. I do that and all it does is it disappears. He Cuba. That's what I was saying. He Cuba. He Cuba. He Cuba. It's knowing where the stress goes, isn't it? Oh, here we go. Hecuba, says Linda Kane. Hecuba. See, isn't it funny? You put those letters, you could do it. He Cuba. Because C-U-B-A, you think of the Cuba, don't you? Think of the place Cuba. But then you put H-E in front of it, and suddenly it's no longer. That's why I was thinking he Cuba. You see, but now you've gone Hecuba. How do you know? How do you know these things? That's what I want to know. How do you know how to pronounce these things? It's when any time I see anything in Latin. And you see, there's what's that? The tribes, the ancient Britain tribes that have the Latin names. You've got the Icy Knee as one, but there's one that I always mispronounce because I pronounce it in an English way. I've got me flower black door. Oh, you got me flower black. Ooh, how did you do that? Did you do it, or did somebody else do it? How did that work? Do they just pop up, or do you choose them? You must choose them, surely. Anyway, it's a bit cold in here. I don't know. The Wikipedia page looks like a B sound on the end, but as you say, who knows? Yes, well, we're getting a mixture of different. Icy Knee. Is that what you mean? The Icy Knee? I'm pretty sure that Icy Knee is the tribe, not Icy Knee. I'm gonna. My head will explode with all this. The locals here are. Here we go. Brigantes. Now, is that pronounced Brigantes? The Brigantes and the Rossini and the Covanori. Was it Covanori? And the Reggie. I used to know these. The Reggie something. Yes, says Morton Lewis. Iceni, not Iceni. Because it's, what is it? Icine or something. Linda Kane just suddenly happened. Was there last night before disappeared, but now back. It's the lovely Julia doing weaving magic behind the scenes. She was there. I don't know whether Julia's still there. She might be She may have fallen back to sleep. I know that the lovely Julia is attending to her baby, probably. From Chester to Cumbria, oh yes, the Crocer country, that's right. That's how the locals pronounce it after a cup of mead. Oh, yes. It's very strange, yes. Brigantes. Not seeing all the posts, though. Oh, yes, maybe I'm not. I've got top chat on. Hang on a minute. Let me get live chat on, because that's where all the posts are. Here we go. It's annoying. I don't know why they put top chat. There's top chat and live chat. I get a choice of two different chats, and I often forget. Indicate not seeing all the posts. Pronounce after a cup of mead. Yeah, that's it. Oh, that is strange. Oh, yes, yeah. And who's making the decisions for top chat? That's what I want to know. It's a ridiculous thing. I am indeed. I was for many years a Led Zeppelin's fan. Led Zeppelins, not Leds. Oh dear. Oh yes, I've missed a whole load of stuff. Yes, I don't get the YouTube thing when it comes to pictures either. It did the same thing. I had a hobo at Catterick for a while who was from Bronsgrove, who got the. Anyway, Linda Kane, I've got it live chat. Yes, I can see. Yes, I had the same. I had top chat, and you have to select. I can't speak today. I'm going to stop. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me. Very kind of you. Be back on at 8 o'clock doing the usual nonsense. And thank you very much for coming along this morning. See, I'm losing track of. Take care. It's Tuesday today, isn't it? Yeah. Tuesday. It's Tuesday. Very good. Aye, man. It's Tuesday. All right. Take care, and I will catch up with you later. Thank you so much for watching. Tatty bye.